Let's do that. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to the AMERISCOPE 2022 class. I'm Maurielle Laurenne. I'm your masterclass coach and cosmic instructor. I know most of you on here today. And in today's masterclass, what we're going to be talking about is the destiny of America for 2022. So we're going to be covering questions like, will Biden complete his presidential term? What potential is showing up in the stars for the potential overthrow of power in 2023? Is recession or another pandemic in our near future coming up this year? What do great researchers and thinkers like the billionaire economist Ray Dalio have to say about the astrology of our changing world order? What are some of the funny little odd things that seem to be showing up in Washington, D.C.? And also, of course, how do other superpowers like China and Russia play a role in America's future? So these are just some of the questions that we're going to be covering in our class today. So the format of our class is going to follow two parts. The first thing is I'm going to give my predictions on all of those various topics, and we're going to include important calendar dates for 2022 at the end so we can see how some of these predictions may play out on a chronological timeline. And then the second portion of our class is we're going to do some live Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions or your comments or observations in the chat box, because we will definitely share those all together at the end. So I am going to, share my screen, hopefully effectively, so that way we can look at a couple of things together. Okay, share screen. Let's try this. Oh, there we go. Can we see my screen? You can see the screen? Awesome, fantastic. Can you still see my face? Yes? Okay, perfect. So here we are, right, in class. I wanted to open with this really chilling quote by Justice William Douglas. He says that, actually, let me move this out of the way too. He says that, quote, "As nightfall does not come all at once, neither does oppression. In both instances, there is a twilight where everything remains seemingly unchanged. And it is in such a twilight that we must all be most aware of change in the air, however slight, lest we become unwitting victims of the darkness." So it is no surprise for most of us that America is full swing amid its Pluto return cycle. This is the same cosmic cycle that caused the fall of Rome. Pluto is known as the cosmic undertaker. It symbolizes power, crime, secrets, death, and rebirth. So this planet of annihilation and regeneration comes full circle every 250 years. Rome, which was the great republic before America, fell into severe political decline during its first Pluto return around 218 AD, and then actually completely collapsed during its second Pluto return around 476 AD. So it begs the rather ominous question, will America fall like Rome? So the idea of the Pluto return is that it dictates the proverbial death of our nation, but what dies is up to us. So it could mean the death of outdated ways like patriarchy and materialism and mostly white supremacy in our country. It could mean that we choose to be reborn again with a more inclusive political, economic, and social system that is updated to represent our current constituency, and that we retrieve power from the federal bureaucrats and return it into the hands of the people. Or the other option is there could always be death by division. There's always the option that we could fall apart into a second civil war that ends the United States of America with the secession of smaller regional groups. So certainly, either way you look at it, Pluto return marks the end of America as the leading world power. But the Pluto return occurs in the USA's value center. This is indicating that our core inner values are being shaken from their original foundations and that our store of value, which is the US dollar, is headed to its grave. Billionaire economist Ray Dalio, he's the owner of the world's most profitable hedge fund. He seems to agree with these astrological indicators. Dalio cites in his recent book, which is titled The Changing World Order, about the rise and fall of financial empires, that basically America is on its way out along with our currency. So how do we pivot from Pluto's peril? From an inner values perspective, we might want to ask ourselves, what are the founding freedoms and ideals that our country needs to have returned to? We might also want to ask ourselves, what are the outdated modes of operation that have been corrupting our nation's founders' original intentions? From an external value perspective, we might want to ask how we can stabilize the economy, bringing back American jobs from abroad and restoring confidence in the US dollar, at least as much as possible. We might also need to be considering how we can embrace other forms of currency, such as digital currency or even the development of international currencies. So what's interesting is, actually, I want to try this. I wonder if I can, I wanted to share my screen in a little bit of a different way. Okay, perfect. I'm sure some of you are already smiling at seeing this slide. It made me smile to make it. So Pluto's transformation is actually most intense this year in 2022 and carrying into 2023. And this possibly indicates a change of power in 2023. Before the end of President Biden's presidential term. It also could signal the overturn of a major world power where one regime seems to give way to some new other regime that's a more dominant player. So President Biden's mental health is the subject of much social media humor. I mean, let's be honest, who hasn't giggled at the crashing America together memes and the bicycle riding memes and the what clueless face t-shirts that people have been wearing, and of course, the endless stream of gaffe speech videos that are available online. But all joking aside, Biden's mental health could be a real threat to the completion of his presidential term if he had some kind of mental breakdown during the 2023 Pluto transition. Other options driving potential change of power in 2023 could be if the president were impeached. Well, Biden does have the lowest popularity rating in presidential history. Or if he accidentally died from COVID. I mean, there is a global pandemic going on. Or, unfortunately, if he was assassinated. Statistically speaking, assassination attempts on US presidents are frighteningly common. According to political researcher Stephen Marsh, the author of The Next Civil War, presidents have a 1 in 11 chance of being assassinated, and up to 17 presidents have currently survived assassination attempts in US history. So an incomplete US presidential term, the ascendancy of China, war with Russia, or loss of the US dollar status as the world reserve currency are all totally valid possibilities that are indicating this Pluto power change that's coming next year. I'd be curious to know, what do you think the Pluto power change coming next year is going to be? So also rocking our money malaise is the Neptune opposition that's really similar to the Neptune placement in 1929 at the Great Depression. History seems to be repeating itself with the same astrological and financial indicators because, again, we're seeing rising inflation, unemployment, and diminishing dollar confidence. Both Pluto and Neptune have been in really history-making positions since 2020, as obviously evidenced by things like a pandemic and a financial crisis. Also, about Neptune. Neptune symbolizes sickness and healing, deception, dreams, spirituality, and redemption. And it's making a really difficult aspect to Mars, the physical planet, in America's chart. So this signals ill health, such as the remnants of COVID-19, and spotlights also the ineffectiveness of our current healthcare system, including possibly deception or misuse in the healthcare system around insurance and pharmaceutical countries. Favorably, though, Neptune's position could also indicate the rise of alternative healing and plant medicine in our country. So in addition to the grand Pluto return cycle, there's two other major cosmic cycles that affect America in 2022. They are the information cycle and the domestic cycle. So the information cycle strikes at our country's birthright characteristic of intellectual liberty through the First Amendment tests around freedom of speech, and it's about the spiritual challenge of determining the truth. We can see some of these incidences already flaring up when we look at things like how, ever since the pandemic, fact checkers have been hired to publicly censor the internet since 2020. And also, who can forget during the spring and summer of this year, the United States government attempt at founding the US Disinformation Committee. Thankfully, that was squashed. But the domestic cycle questions our definition of home base and who belongs here. It also questions our right to protect our home, ourselves, and our family. So we can see some signs of this already coming up when we look recently at Fourth Amendment rulings around search and seizure, Border Patrol dilemmas. For example, recently in June, the Supreme Court in the Egbert versus Bull ruling provided totally carte blanche immunity to Border Patrol agents and US Immigration and Customs agents around civilian search and seizure. The Second Amendment right to protect oneself, our president was notoriously quoted as saying regarding that amendment, well, no amendment is absolute. And meanwhile, saying that no amendment regarding our ability to protect ourselves is absolute, the US government was also stockpiling 9mm ammunition for government agencies, even as bizarre as spending $11 million on ammunition to arm the Internal Revenue Service and the Railroad Commission. Geez, forgetting to pay your taxes is turning into potentially a lethal engagement here. So with the information cycle, we can see it in two ways. The first is on a practical level, and the second is a more symbolic level. During the information cycle, some of the practical issues that we're dealing with in 2020 are surrounding information and misinformation, proper data, the right to communicate or have access to important communications, documentation, agreements, negotiations, travel, schools, logistics, and local grassroots activism. But on a symbolic level, the things of the information cycle deal with the spiritual challenge of staying connected to our foundational origins and the right to feel safe. So let's talk now about the domestic cycle. The domestic cycle is going to bring for us issues around, on a practical level, agriculture and food. I mean, hello, it was just this week that billionaire Bill Gates was caught buying up 1,200 acres of farmland. He's now the world's largest individual landowner. So we have a lot of food shortages going on, but the rich know that, they should be buying up this very important resource because there could be difficulties coming in the future. We're also going to see changes in real estate, having to learn to deal with the homeless and those on our borders. There's been lots of questions about citizenship and immigration, and also mass migration. For example, people from California coming to Texas. Heritage peoples, meaning the natives and Native Americans. Family units, people being split up and divided, whether it's due to their political beliefs or COVID status, vaccine, no vaccine, right? Mothers are a strong issue during the domestic cycle. And how could we forget the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court ruling that was passed in June, which of course brought a lot of attention to issues surrounding mothers, along with the baby formula shortage. It brings issues around parents and grandparents and the aging population as well. What are we going to do with the boomers? On a symbolic level, this is about our right to feel safe and our definition of patriotism. So within the bigger story of both the Pluto return the information cycle, and the domestic cycle, there's going to be 4 subplots. There's 3 seasonal Mercury retrogrades, a hangover Venus retrograde from last year, and a biannual Mars retrograde that sends us rumbling into next year. So let's take a look at those. The 4 retrograde reviews. First, money and values, information and truth. That was early in the year. This was from around holiday season of 2021 and carried us into about February of this year. So what do those topics mean? Well, think back to that time frame. Early in the year is when we were finding out who was paying who. So for example, this is when the information about Dr. Fauci and the National Institute of Health funding coronavirus research in Wuhan, China, prior to the outbreak was exposed. This was also when the Bill Gates Foundation and US government and China government rehearsing a global pandemic scenario called Event 201, just before an actual global pandemic occurred, when that became public news. There were also a lot of vaccine payoffs to government and insurance agencies that became questionable. During that time, there was also a lot of trouble with the US dollar valuation. We all remember it was a little bit of slim pickings for our Christmas and New Year's. This was also when the US was creeping towards its debt ceiling. And of course, what did they do? They just raised the debt ceiling so we wouldn't cross it, right? At that time too, we had a strong stock market decline, and there were a lot of digital currency dilemmas. Is cryptocurrency a real thing? Do we accept it? Do we not? How do we trade with it, right? We're still debating the status of how do we work with things like cryptocurrency. And during the early time in the year, there were also a lot of revelations about the 2020 pandemic and the earlier presidential election that came back to bite us in the keister. This was also the time frame when Trump was returning to cultural and media prominence. And I think a lot of people came into this new year wondering, what do we really stand for and what do we really value? Now, it's interesting because also at the early time of the year, during that first retrograde review, there was strong questions around the accurate data of the election reporting and also the virus counting. There was leftover disenchantment around information censorship to free speech. There were still some travel restrictions because different areas would have different localized laws. Masks here, no masks there. You had to have a vaccine here, but you didn't have a vaccine there. People were also in the process of negotiating contracts with suppliers and outside organizations because we were already starting to see the struggles with our supply chain logistics. And we were experiencing changes in our schooling at that time because the prior year, all the kids had been doing school mostly virtually, but this year, many children were allowed to return to school, but each school had different restrictions about it, right? So we definitely saw how the relationship between money and values and information and truth was quite a dilemma at the beginning of the year. So the second retrograde review period is probably more familiar to you guys because it just happened here during the summer. The topics were work and wellness and of course supplies. So what has been happening for us here in May, June, and July? Big time unemployment issues were a theme. Yeah, and this includes actually the repercussions of the government subsidized stimulus checks, which have in some cases inadvertently unincentivized civilians to return to their jobs post-pandemic. I know we see it everywhere. There's signs on people's doors saying, we're hiring, and people just can't get folks to come in and apply or stick around, which is kind of ironic in a time where there's massive unemployment, but we're being paid to not always go back to work. So we're definitely seeing employment conflicts around that. There's also been a mild upsurge of the virus and its variants. This was when the monkeypox flare started to pop up, yeah? And so people were getting a little concerned again and more cautious. This also dealt with other health mandates during the summer. Of course, I think the biggest health mandate that came to light during the summer was the Supreme Court ruling on abortion with the overturn of Roe versus Wade in June. Increasing rents have been seen also around the United States, which is causing some of the mass migrations from especially coastal cities into more inland areas where they're hoping things are affordable, but it's having the opposite effect of driving rents and local costs way up for those people who previously had good prices. So we're all called rejuggling our money and our financial priorities there. There's also been a reorganization of internal government staff. We know that there was the replacement of the very unpopular US Press Secretary, Jen Psaki, and unfortunately, her successor was kind of thrown right into the wildfire and has had a bit of a bumpy start herself, taking over the position. We're also starting to see some agricultural challenges, which are going to require collective response later in the year. We're going to talk about that in a moment when we talk about the fourth retrograde that's going to hit us this fall. So save that little nugget in your head that there's definitely agricultural and food related issues about to get stronger. And relative to supplies, just within the past week or so, of course, the big news that has hit the fan is that President Biden has sold over 1 million barrels of U.S. strategic gas reserves over to the Chinese oil giant Unipec. So people are wondering, hey, we're in a supply chain stretch. Why are you giving more of our supplies away? Same thing during the summer of May, June, and July with giving arms and other finances to Ukraine to help them fight the Russo-Ukrainian war. Again, people are saying, hey, we're struggling over here at home. Why is our stuff going away? Yeah? Okay, so let's look a little bit into the future, getting ready for the fall. Our third retrograde review will hit in September and October. The theme there is about leadership and reputation. So some of my potential predictions, and I'd love to hear yours at the end, what you think might happen, is I wonder if President Biden or his administration is going to incur some major fall from grace, right? Some major gaffe that just seems to kind of stab at the heart of American people and just really shake their confidence already that it's low, right? I think also too, citizens are really going to be debating who they think should be in charge at this point. So there could be a serious loss of confidence for the citizens in terms of leadership and maybe some outcry about who they think should reasonably be in charge for the rest of the term here. I also think that a lot of other world leaders are going to publicly denounce American leadership. I mean, we've all seen on social media and the news, the Saudi Arabian leadership is practically laughing at American leadership. We've all heard Putin's really now famous speech that he gave in June about what he thinks about American leadership, so on and so forth. So I wouldn't be surprised, unfortunately, if we do continue to embarrass ourselves, that a lot of other global leaders are going to be just really open about what they think about us. Yeah. I think too, there's going to be some serious prestige and public image issues, maybe even some resignations. So if things are found out about government and corporate officials, they may be pretty humiliating or pretty incriminating. So those people are going to feel pushed to just step down and kind of get out of the public eye and go lick their wounds elsewhere. And I think there could be some firings of top corporate and government officials during that September-October time period. So yikes, it seems like the administration and our top corporate leaders are going to be on some pretty hot water in the fall. Okay, the big one, this last retrograde review period of the year. So this is number 4. This deals with allies and frenemies as well as shortages, okay? This is a biannual, meaning it happens once every 2 years, Mars retrograde that occurs in the partnership sector for the United States. And it starts at the end of October, around the week of Halloween, and technically carries till the second week of January. But my advice to you is to really expect it to last until March. Why do we say that? Because we all know that as a planet appears to go retrograde in the sky, it appears to back up and lose ground. So even though it stops backing up on the date that it goes direct, it still has to make up for lost ground, and it's going to take a couple weeks to do that. So I really think this difficult, stressful period of that 4th retrograde is going to take us from October to March. That's what I would really prepare for. Okay, well, what do we think could go down? Growing troubles with other nations, especially like Russia and China, and people making frenemies, and also some people declaring open enemies. This means people don't like us, right? On the international playground, Other countries and other power players are just going to probably outright say, we may not be for you, right? So we're going to have to see, is it going to be Russia who kind of openly declares in some way, anti-American policies? I hate to say war, that's kind of dramatic, but some kind of battle between us. Could it be China? Could it be someone else? Yeah. It'll be interesting too to watch people that we wouldn't necessarily think on the global scale would be friends, like countries where we think they don't really have a lot in common, but they're getting together. They might get together simply because the thing that they have in common is they don't like America right now. Yeah, so we'll have to watch out for that. I think also too, during this time, there's going to be a resurgence of debates around individual autonomy and personal freedom. That is just one issue ever since the vaccine and the pandemic that we've not really been able to resolve and put to rest. So I think we're going to have to hit another wave of those personal freedom limitations and a lot of open political discussion about what should or shouldn't be the extent of our personal freedoms in a time of crisis. Yeah, there might be some really uncomfortable and surprising legislation that comes out around our personal freedoms during that last retrograde period. And of course, I actually think a lot of landmark court cases, right? Because if they're making laws using emergency powers at an administration level, there's going to be that question of, is this legal? Can you do that? Is that an appropriate interpretation of the Constitution or of the job role, right? So there could be just some really interesting things from a legal perspective that we see on the Supreme Court or other local levels happen. Now, what I would definitely be preparing for is food shortages and supply chain shortages. My advice is take a good stock of what you like and enjoy, and I would go get some extra of it now. Why? Because hopefully in the summer, it'll either still be in stock at the store or it'll still be in stock at a price you're comfortable spending. I think the closer we get to the fall, especially as China continues to lock in its workforce and employees, meaning most of our products aren't going to be able to get to us as quickly, it's going to be difficult, right, on the shelves here in the United States. So I would just definitely stock up on the things you like. Also realizing too that the continued sinking of the dollar is going to receive more stress during that challenging Mars retrograde. I know, just when we thought the dollar couldn't do any worse, it just might. So, good measure might be, hey, don't spend so extravagantly right now. Have a little extra savings, maybe pull some cash out of the bank, right? Or maybe diversify, get out of cash. I think the expression I always hear from Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is cash is trash, right? So put it in something else like gold or silver or real estate or something, right? Don't just stick it all of it under your mattress. The other thing, they're probably going to announce a new variant of the virus. Right? So whatever they're going to call it, XYZ, I wouldn't be surprised if come October through January, March, they're going to say, oh my God, version XYZ is out there again. So we need to do exactly what we did last time, where we lock everyone down and have all these special emergency powers and things like that. So beware that there could be a new variation coming out there. Now, I will say this too. It sounds, kind of stressful, but it's notable that there are some really threatening aspects to the USA's partnership sector that are building over the next couple of years. The stress is intensifying between us individually within the country, but also relative to our international frenemies. And I think that some murmurings about a second civil war, or as some people call it, perhaps a new international war, are going to escalate closer to 2026, because that is when Uranus, the revolutionary planet, is going to transition into the same position that it was in during the original American Civil War. So particularly in terms of how we treat each other and how we think about ourselves and our fellow citizens, is if we're not careful, I think our greatest enemy could actually be ourselves. So I know that was a difficult section to talk about the retrogrades, and you might be wondering at this point, hey, is there any hope for 2022? What good things might be happening in the year? Well, there was actually something really cool and interesting that happened this year in the skies. So there was this rare 166-year astrological alignment between hopeful Jupiter and visionary Neptune, and it occurred in April. And interestingly, in terms of things that seem to carry us forward into a more progressive future or help to lighten things up, that date coincides with the first Supreme Court election of an African-American woman, Ketanji Brown. And it was also the end of the airplane mask mandates. So, I do think that there is still some room to hope for the future. And I do think that as Jupiter and Neptune collide and caress each other throughout the year, we will see some of these forward-thinking mini miracles occur. So not all hope is lost just yet. But on to our next fascinating topic. Let's talk about Washington, D.C., the inside scoop on the Capitol. Yeah? What the heck is happening at the White House? Now, it's interesting. When we look at the Capitol for this year, Uranus, that revolutionary wizard planet, it actually shakes up our capital city's identity center, the sun, starting last year, 2021, all the way to next year, 2023. So I think that Washington, D.C. is going to experience high turnover during the Biden administration. Now, positively used, the presence of Uranus can bring innovation and progress and forward thinking. And maybe that's what voters were hoping for when they initially elected the Biden administration to the White House. Negatively used, Uranus can signal revolution and disruption and unpredictability. So unfortunately, that seems to be the outcome thus far at the first pass of the Biden administration, but maybe there's still time for it to shake out differently. Also to note, Uranus is a symbol of science and technology, the internet, electricity, outer space, and freedom. So it is interesting to see how those specific themes have really played an integral role so far during Biden's presidency. Now, Pluto, the god of the underworld, challenges Messenger Mercury in the chart of our capital city. Lies, 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 and information revealed about the lies are definitely going to get exposed this year. These are the scandals of our government leaders and corporate elites that are getting revealed through whistleblowers and tell-all publications. So I would actually keep an eye out for mysterious deaths of the truth speakers, right? Watch carefully to what happens to people like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden or Ghislaine Maxwell and things like that, right? What happens to the people that somehow have the information about what's going on? I think that Washington, D.C. may be a very lethal place this year, but that the truthful information will try to get out anyways, because usually secrets don't stay dead under the planetary transit like Pluto and Mercury. They do tend to find their way out. Another thing, in sickness and in health could be the famous last words of the Biden presidency. So there's a lot of wellness issues at the White House, possibly, or even with President Biden himself. And this is because of an ongoing press between Neptune and Mars. Biden or his administration could be dealing with the continuous effects of COVID or other illnesses that affect the physical vitality and even the physical lasting power of those who are in office. So coincidentally, Mars-Neptune is actually also a sign of healing, which, is kind of the great cry of our nation right now on both a literal level and I think on a spiritual level. A bit about women in the White House. The aspect between Saturn and Venus talks about the responsibility and the judgment of the women in the White House, most likely Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Vice President Kamala Harris, and First Lady Jill Biden. So First Lady Jill Biden has mostly remained outside of the press, but she might be more responsible than we know for tending to her husband's ailing health behind the scenes. The First Lady has been seen on numerous occasions giving her husband instructions when he is forgetful at public appearances. So should the president's mental health continue deteriorating, the First Lady's role might shift into being the primary caregiver for her family, because next next year, she actually does a Jupiter return in her domestic center somewhere between this year and next. So I wouldn't be surprised if her family duties became more prominent. Also, Vice President Kamala Harris, she would be the next in line should anything happen to President Biden. VP Harris's chart does show a potential rise to prominence between 2023 and 2024. However, some recent public appearance interviews with her have kind of sent mixed signals about her ability to communicate the presidential stance on key issues, and it's left some voters unclear about her ability to lead decisively. Vice President Harris is undergoing her cosmic Saturn return, which is a mark of maturity and responsibility and adultness that tests our strength about every 30 years. So she's coming up on her second Saturn return. I do think that this Saturn return year might be her make or break year in terms of her strength and her ability to gain the confidence of others that she could lead in the event of an emergency. So let's hope that she kind of grows into her leadership position, which may be possible and unfortunately necessary when we look ahead at her 2023 to 24 planetary transits. So the last famous female in the White House, Press Secretary Jen Psaki. So she's become the fountain of ridicule for some of her flip-flopping press statements, right? So Press Secretary Psaki is doing her cosmic midlife crisis as revolutionary Uranus in the sky opposes her inborn Uranus in the chart. So basically, this is the flip-flopping and the sense that her world is turning upside down. Additionally, Neptune is challenging her emotional moon and her physical Mars. So I was wondering if perhaps behind the scenes, she was in some ways secretly having an emotional breakdown from the demands of her position and also the strong amount of ridicule that she had been receiving from the public, which would be difficult for anyone in the public eye to have to process. So I've definitely thought that it was unlikely that Psaki would be able to remain press secretary for the full duration of the administration. And as predicted, her role has recently been replaced. So, international involvements. Let's talk about China, Russia, and Ukraine. And then after that, we'll get to some of the key dates for the year. Yeah? So China is the global dragon. Last year, China had its big day in the spotlight because it was the country's manifestation cycle. China really came to the forefront of the world stage ever since the pandemic. And basically, the billionaire economist Ray Dalio, the author of that book on the rise and fall of financial empires called The Changing World Order, he agrees that basically China is the new world superpower and that it's happening now. So on a symbolic level, this is raising the question of what exactly is being brought into being here? What is being born onto the global landscape? I think that China is having to ask itself the question, who am I now? And they need to look at their sense of self-definition and responsible growth. Now, this year in 2022, it brings China's prosperity cycle and their information cycle. So the prosperity cycle highlights China's increasing wealth and also currency value. And it could also indicate new rules that China has about money. Interestingly enough, in June of 2022 this year, citizens' bank accounts were linked to their public health records, and those with COVID positive status were declined cash withdrawals from their own bank accounts. So this actually set a kind of scary precedent on the world stage that perhaps other governments would do the same thing. The spiritual challenge of the prosperity cycle for China surrounds their inner values. What's the cost of being rich? The country's notorious environmental and human rights violations in the name of profit could continue to raise some serious alarm. As we've all seen in the news before, this is Chinese sweatshops, child labor, organ selling, pollution, and more. So the second major cycle affecting China this year is their information cycle. And this points to the technological advancements in cyberspace and the increasing importance of international trade agreements with the profitable dragon. The internet and communication technology will continue to be dominated by the Chinese. And since they're the world's largest producer of consumer products, China's supply chain decisions, I think, are going to reveal our weak and codependent international logistics network. As China continues to fence in their own workforce, erecting cement barriers in neighborhoods that the government has designated as COVID sensitive, we're going to feel a worldwide supply shortage intensifying from October 2022 to January of next year, but really March of next year, during that troublesome Mars retrograde. So it should also be noted about China's chart in general that their rather caustic natal Mars-Pluto aspect in the relationship sector means that China is kind of comfortable giving the middle finger to partnership unless they can control the partnership or unless the partnership is financially beneficial. So China isn't likely to feel bad about becoming the big dog on the block who dominates other people and won't really feel inclined to act as a team player in the global community unless the deal suits them. Moreover, China's natal Sun and Mercury retrograde Neptune alignment in the global sector challenges Uranus, the planet of unpredictability and individuality, meaning the country is prone to some rather inconsistent international relations policies and has a zero fucks given attitude towards foreign policy. The same planetary alignment in the global sector is also what indicates that the country is definitely geared towards global expansion and very strong and strict religious doctrine and ideological fanaticism, as well as actually intellectual prowess. So perhaps there is some truth in the old adage that Chinese students are always just a little bit smarter than the rest of us. Now, how do the 4 retrograde periods in 2022 affect China and therefore possibly also affect us in our relationship to China? So that first retrograde period, which came early in the year around holiday season till around February, examined China's role and responsibility in the world, as well as some secrets. Interestingly, this was a time when, again, secrets were exposed about China's involvement with the United States behind the scenes with the virus, known famously as the meeting of Event 201. The next retrograde period for China just happened recently in the summer, this May, June, July period. This dealt with families and the next generation. This was the time for China when they were locking people in their homes with cement barricades and fences, preventing both employment opportunities and education for their people. So, of course, what happened here in the US? We started to see some of those supply chain shortages come up. Why? Because they couldn't get their people to work. They had locked them in. Now, the next retrograde review period coming up in the fall is going to deal with Chinese foreign relations and mutual assets. So I'm wondering if perhaps there will be pressure worldwide on trade and logistics agreements and maybe even some new international policies for how China wants to deal with other countries. And there's possible too, I think, that there could be a major legal violation on the part of China where they have to kind of stop and get their cards called a little bit, yeah? Now, the final retrograde review period of the year, the big one, the Mars retrograde from October to January of next year, this deals with the next generation and also entrepreneurship. So perhaps on some level, there's going to be a bit of a youth uprising from the people, especially the young people who are tired of being locked in their homes and want to go to work and be educated and express themselves in the world. And then also showing some strong stressors to innovation and creation and production during that time. Now, next year could be super major for China. They could truly ascend to the position of world supremacy in 2023 during that Pluto power planet transition. Pluto will come and knock at the front door of the Chinese horoscope. So other times of prominence for China in the future were last year, 2021, when they really came on the world stage after we started to reopen from the pandemic. Next year, when Pluto, the power planet, crosses the front door of their horoscope, and then 2026 to 2028. Yeah, so we'll keep a very close eye on China as it continues to develop its strength in the global marketplace. Okay, the other thing that I'm sure we're all dying to look at, Russia and Ukraine. Yeah, let's see what's going on there. Let's see what's happening with our favorite former KGB officer, Putin. Yeah. So Russia the bear, yeah, it's really interesting because Russia and Ukraine seem to be locked in karmic ties because they're both freshly at war with each other, and they're actually both still processing a very important time stamp in astrology, that Saturn return cycle. We've heard many times it's a thing that happens every 30 years that assesses our maturity and responsibility, right? Both countries were starting their Saturn return last year, and they're still pushing through the final throes of that this year. So it's really, they seem to be locked in these karmic ties, and they're both going through this very cosmic rite of passage together. Basically, the eyes of the universe are trying to see how Russia and Ukraine have grown up since both of their revolutions exactly 30 years ago. Yeah. This year in 2022 for Russia, it brings their partnership cycle and their empowerment cycle. So the partnership cycle highlights Russia's alliances and frenemies, and also walls and boundaries that they might be putting up. The Russian leader Putin stated in his June 2022 speech recently that, quote, "The era of the unipolar Western world is over." So Putin elaborated in his speech last month that, quote, "When they won the Cold War, the US declared themselves God's own representatives on earth, people who have no responsibilities, only interests. They have declared these interests sacred. They seemingly have not noticed that new, powerful centers have arisen and are getting louder and louder. Each of them develops its own political systems, social institutions, economic growth, and of course, has the right to defend itself to guarantee its national sovereignty." Putin reiterated that his position is that he was forced to initiate the invasion of Ukraine by the West's refusal to address his legitimate security concerns. He said, quote, "The West has fundamentally refused to fulfill its earlier obligations. It is simply impossible to reach any new agreements with them. In the current situation, in the face of growing threats and risks for us, Russia's decision to conduct this special military operation to Ukraine was forced, unquestionably difficult, but forced and necessary. Our colleagues do not simply deny reality. They are trying to resist the course of history. They think in terms of the last century. They're in captivity of their own delusions about countries outside of their golden billion. They see everything else as periphery, their backyard. They treat these places as their colonies, and they treat the people living there as second-class citizens because the West considers themselves to be exceptional. If they are exceptional, it means that everyone else is of a second sort. This is what Putin said of his point of view of Western elites who generate most of their wealth through exploitation and domination of the non-Western world. So the spiritual challenge of Russia's partnership cycle surrounds justice. What is fair? Deliberations around ethics and legalities could create some serious tensions while Russia is abandoning certain agreements and then shaking hands on other new agreements. And as Putin continues separating from the West and carrying on his war with Ukraine, he may look for new allies, specifically anti-American allies. He may readily enter into a relationship of convenience that might otherwise seem misaligned. The old adage could be true for Russia that, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The other important cycle for Russia this year is the empowerment cycle. And so this is speaking to Russia's desire for greater power and wealth, so they could really feel the need to strong arm some mutually held assets or geopolitical resources in an effort to kind of gain sway in the global marketplace. The 4 major retrograde review periods this year that will affect Russia and therefore also the US and in our relationship to both Russia and Ukraine are as follows. The first major retrograde period happened at the beginning of the year, right? The end of last year all the way through about January, February. This was examining Russia's next generation and also specialization. It's interesting, this was the time when Putin declared, as we mentioned earlier, quote, the end of the unipolar Western world, and invaded Ukraine, which totally sparks a new chapter for this country. And many people at that time were also wondering about some things that were going on with Putin's mental health and physical health. Now, the second retrograde review period has just happened for us here in the summer, this May, June, July period. And this deals in Russia with government and legalities. For example, a lot of the debates between NATO and Russia about the geopolitical consequences for the Ukraine invasion, and also President Biden's new restrictions on Russian gold and oil. Now, the next upcoming retrograde, what will happen with Russia in the fall? That September-October time period is going to deal with Russia's role in the world and also their finances. Experts are predicting that Russia's GDP is going to drop by about 15% this year due to the Ukraine war. And surprisingly, actually, inflation has already passed the 15% mark for them. Also, I think that some of these major supply chain disruptions are going to stress both the Russian military and the civilians, so that may actually slow down Russia's war role a little bit. Now, the last retrograde review period of the year, it's the one we're all, kind of waiting for, that Mars retrograde happening October through January of next year. This will deal with Russia's leadership and their reputation. I'm wondering if perhaps Putin might suffer a health issue that interferes with his ability to execute the national plan. Now, it'll be interesting to see how much the public actually gets to find out about Putin's potential health issue. As we know, many times governments, for safety and security reasons, will keep private health challenges of their leaders because they don't want the country to appear weak. So we may or may not get the full scoop on how well Putin's health actually is. Of course, also too, he's a former KGB officer, so he's very secretive to begin with. So he may not want to reveal a lot about what's going on in his personal life, but I'm suspecting there could be something. The other thing is Putin may make an even bolder breakaway move to separate the East and the West. So we've got to be prepared for really having a line drawn in the sand, perhaps by Putin, in regards to his desire to separate from us. Yeah. Okay. So we've looked at some of the hot topics that most of us have been wondering about this year. We've talked about what is going on with the US dollar. We've looked at China and Russia and Ukraine. We've taken a look at the Biden administration. We've looked at some other long-term indicators. Let's do the super fun part where we make predictions about dates. Yeah, let's switch gears. So if you have your calendar with you, you may want to make a note of some of these dates. And if not, just listen along, right? Let's see how it all shakes out. So what's going on in July? July is where we are now at the date of this class. So it started off the 4th of July celebration, which is really important in America. It's our birthday, and usually people are very festive at this time. But we had a challenging aspect between Mars and Pluto. So this is really caustic and divisive. Nobody was really happy about celebrating America's birthday this year. So it was a bit of a tough Independence Day for most of us. So as of the date of this class, what will be coming up for us next week is one of these dates on the calendar here, the week of July 13th through 17th. This is the Capricorn full moon and also the alignment between Sun, Mercury, and Venus in Cancer. I think this is going to erect some of the January 6th Capitol riot revelations that have been going on in the courts and in the media. So we may get more information about that. And I also think it's going to revive a lot of the Trump stuff. Anytime the planets pass through Capricorn or Cancer, those are both strong positions in Trump's chart. So he tends to resurge in the media and in prominence during those times. So I guess we can all message each other after this class and touch base next week to see what information was coming out at that time, to see if this prediction came true. The third week of July, starts a 6-month Chiron retrograde cycle. This is the notion over the second half of the year, meaning from about July to holiday season, of we're experiencing on a social level the feeling of the wounded warrior. So this is a lot of our unexpressed anger and frustration that we have about the current world situation starting to erode and come out even more. And it also indicates the need for greater self-advocacy on an individual level, right? We can't just sit back as individual citizens and say, well, the government officials will take care of it. Those people are, smarter and more experienced than I am, so I'll just sit here and wait around. No, our founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution and when they created America, their plan wasn't for some removed set of officials to make decisions about individual freedom. They wanted the people, the patriots, to make decisions about their individual freedoms and play an active role in self-governance. So this is saying that in the second half of the year, we as individual citizens need to be really expressive and educated about our rights, about options to resolve some of these world situations, and to speak up to our leaders and to take action. Yeah. And then the end of the month in July rounds out with another long-term retrograde period. It'll last for about 5 months from July 28th to November 23rd, just till about Thanksgiving. This is the Jupiter retrograde. It's a major downsizing. So this second half of the year, like we had talked about, particularly with food supplies and supply shortages, is things are going to feel like they're shrinking, including our paychecks, including things on the shelves, etc. So things start to downsize, which means that in order to be prepared, you might want to do a healthy downsize as well, right? We're not going to live too extravagantly. We're going to be mindful with how we spend or what we keep in stock. So yeah, downsizing is definitely coming, and those shortages are going to start being more obvious to us in the second half of the year. All right, looking ahead at August. So the month after our class, August, the beginning of the month, the first week into the second week, is a variety of kind of uncomfortable aspects between warrior Mars, revolutionary Uranus, and strict Saturn. And quite frankly, Mars, Uranus, and Saturn alignments are known for being dangerous. They are known for oftentimes accidents, even innocent accidents, getting into a car accident or something like that, right? But on a global scale, we're looking for maybe something that's like global violence or a really shocking, stunning decision about something within the United States or in the world. So I think that the first and second week of August could have some pretty disruptive news and experiences for us. So we'll watch the headlines. Towards the end of August, we have another long-term planetary retrograde that gets set into place August 24th to January of next year. That should say 2023, not 2022 on the slides. The Uranus retrograde through Taurus, this is going to waterfall some of the existing agricultural challenges and food shortages that we have. It will layer on top of that Mars retrograde, this one that we keep talking about, saying it starts right around Halloween and continues into first quarter next year. So we get this kind of double layer, double whammy that's saying food and agriculture are going to have problems. Taurus is also a sign of money. So definitely, crashing US dollar and trying to figure out what to do there, rising inflation. Those debates about digital currency versus fiat currency could come up again. And certainly with Uranus, the revolutionary, this is questions about what freedom means to us. Yeah, what does freedom mean in today's day and age? September. September is the preamble, the prelude to that more challenging time in the fall that we had talked about with the Mars retrograde. What makes up also challenging is there's multiple layers of retrogrades happening on top of each other. Retrogrades are really normal. I know as a class, we've talked about this before. They're a natural planetary pattern that happens all the time in the sky. So it's not necessarily anything to be afraid of. But when multiple retrogrades are happening on top of each other, things get a little sticky, which is why certain time frames where there's multiple retrogrades happening feel more challenging than others. So this prelude in September It's a Mercury retrograde. It's our normal one. It's our seasonal fall retrograde. It's going to challenge America's leadership and reputation. This is that time when I think that President Biden or his administration could really experience a fall from grace, right? And people are wondering, who the heck should be leading this country right now? I don't even know anymore, they may be feeling like. And this is when some of those other world leaders, whether it's Putin or whoever else, could just be kind of laughing at American leadership and really saying, we're not taking you guys seriously right now. We're not liking what's going on. Those major prestige and public image issues for us. Because of that, there could be some resignations and firings and people leaving their really top positions because of the embarrassment or the issue, and they just need to step down from power. So let's see who it is, what they did, and what happens, and more importantly, who we're going to use to replace them, because we still have to lead this country and hopefully into a bright and better future, right? Then the other key date in September is the fall equinox, right? This will be the week of September 22nd. It's the midpoint, the halfway marker of the Mercury retrograde cycle, and it's one of the 4 major stations of the year, right? We get the spring equinox, we get the summer solstice, we get the fall equinox, and then the winter solstice. So historically, governments and leaders and kings would always like to make big announcements around those 4 time markers. So of course, at the fall equinox, we can anticipate there might be a really major announcement or event that happens in our world. All right. Into the hot spot, October. We knew it was coming, right? Usually it's my favorite season of the year because I love Halloween, but this is going to be perhaps it will be a very Halloween-like October with all of the clowning acts that are going on. So the month begins with something that normally we would be excited about on October 2nd. We go, oh my God, I'm so relieved Mercury retrograde ended. But don't get too excited. Why? Because the Mars retrograde is on the horizon just a few weeks later. Yeah. Second week of October, the Pluto direct, meaning October through March of next year. That was that transition, that final push with Pluto, the planet of power, leaving one station in the sky and forever switching into another. So it could be pretty dramatic from October to spring of next year, around that March timeframe, to see who takes the power, right? Will it be China taking power from American supremacy? Will it be Biden, for some reason, is unable to complete his term and a new person is temporarily put in power? Like, what will this mean, right? So we start to see that big, final, dramatic, grand ending start for us in October, yeah? The 2 weeks right around Halloween, hate to say it, but Halloween season does look a little bit scary. We've got eclipses and retrogrades and all those kinds of things happening there. So I would say definitely pick your apocalypse costume to wear this year, yes. And I do think that during that time frame of the last 2 weeks of October, there could be some really big news about Bill Gates, Putin, or Biden. Why? Because they all have strong Scorpio placements in their charts. So we're going to be hearing stuff about them during that time. And then now we get to the big one that we've been hinting at throughout today's class, which is the biannual Mars retrograde. This starts right around Halloween and carries us to the second week of January. But remember, you and I are good astrologers. So we know that we're going to give grace till about March, because it's going to take Mars a couple weeks to kind of get back into shape after he finishes his retrograde. Yeah. So this is the review of both partnerships and frenemies for the United States. Yeah. So over the Mars retrograde period, this is growing troubles with other kids in the playground, probably Russia and China, perhaps others. This is when some nations may openly declare that the U.S. is kind of, they're not for us. I hate to say enemy because that's dramatic, but they're not for us. Yeah. On a personal level, there could be a lot of me versus the collective debates happening. Again, those restrictions around personal freedom in a time of emergency. Remember, we had dealt with that when the pandemic first hit, and we were hoping, oh, it's, we're opening back up again. We're going out. We're not wearing masks. Well, with the Mars retrograde, there may be more of that me versus what I want versus what's good for the collective happening again. Yeah. And then I do think some of those landmark court cases, because again, if the government makes some legal decisions citing executive power during an emergency circumstance, a lot of people may be saying, I don't know, is that legal? Are we interpreting this properly? Should we be able to do this? What does it mean? And then of course, those supply chain shortages we've been talking about and the continued drop of the dollar. Yeah. All right, let's see what Thanksgiving holds for us. The first week, right, November 5th, right around there, there is another eclipse and also a bit of a challenging aspect to Venus, right? So this could mean that there are some exacerbated food shortages that we'll be hearing about in the news during the first week of November, and also greater currency concerns. Again, I think during that first and into part of the second week of November, we're going to hear more about Gates, Putin, and Biden. Why? Because the Scorpio and the opposite sign of that is Taurus planets are very strong in all of their charts. So when these activities happen in the sky, it activates their life. It just means stuff is going on with them. So we're going to have to see what they're up to at that time or what they're saying about our future. Now, Thanksgiving is a little bit hopeful. Right around November 23rd, Jupiter goes direct. So this uplifts us a little bit and gives us some mild hope. It's kind of like pretending that the sky isn't falling for just a moment. Yeah. And maybe we need a little bit of that healthy self-delusion to save our sanity during a tough time, right? And maybe we need that so we can enjoy our holidays with our family. So yeah, maybe we'll just kind of look the other way on Thanksgiving, yeah, and choose to celebrate in spite of circumstances. Yeah, make your own happiness. Then the end of the month, the 30th of November, an aspect between Venus and Mars in Sagittarius could prompt an inspiring speech from leaders as a public relations effort. So we'll have to see what's going on with the president and the press secretary and people like that at that time. If there's, magazine covers coming out about them and hopeful speeches that they're making, trying to inspire the people and keep us gaining our support, right, during a tough time. I'll look forward to actually seeing what they say. Yeah. All right, and the grand finale for our year, holiday season, right? Christmas, New Year's, the end of the year. We're all making our New Year's resolutions. Most importantly, my birthday in December. No, I'm just kidding. So December 3rd, Neptune moving direct into June of next year. This is the lifting of the veil, right? This is when we pull the wool off of our eyes. Yeah, so we're starting to see through the bullshit between now and summer of next year. And we're wanting more accountability and we're wanting answers and we're wanting problem solving. Yeah. So again, when people's eyes can see, there can be a lot of frustration and upset, but when the truth comes out, that's what also allows us to solve problems and make progress. So it can also be very, very good for us. Yeah. The second week of December, the 7th, the full moon aligns with Sun and Mars. Mars is that masculine muscle energy. Yeah. So it's probably going to inspire a lot of our global leaders to want to like flex their muscles in shows of strength. Putin might be showing off, Ukraine might be showing off, President Biden will be doing his best to show off if he's still, there at this point. So we'll have to see like who's the winner. Yeah, it's kind of like a bunch of guys standing around the gym trying to show who can lift the heaviest weights at that time and inspire those around them. So we'll have to actually see who makes the measure and sizes up. Now, just before Christmas, we get the winter solstice, right? This is December 20th through 23rd. Again, this is one of the 4 major markers of every year. Yeah, the winter solstice is the culmination point or the completion of kind of the annual dance of the stars in the sky. So of course, just like the spring equinox, the summer solstice, the fall equinox, we can bet that the winter solstice is going to have some kind of major announcement or event. Interesting to note that in the past 2 years, the US government has announced major things during the winter solstice. The first year in 2020, they announced the discovery of the vaccine. And then unsurprisingly, on the exact same date, the following year, they announced the vaccine pill version. Yeah, so we're going to have to see what kind of grand announcement they come up with this year at the winter solstice. And you can sit back in your chair with your notepad and laugh and go, oh, I told you so. We so knew that was coming, right? Right there around the winter solstice, something, yeah? So what about New Year's? Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a solemn New Year's. So we get another retrograde. Remember we said the fall is so sticky, not because retrogrades are bad, just because they're kind of all layered on top of each other, which makes things confusing or slow. So starting right around the New Year's holiday, when we would usually be setting our New Year's resolutions and toasting with glasses of champagne to each other, we begin a Mercury retrograde, and it will carry us into the first part of the following year. This particular one happens in Capricorn, and the reason Capricorn is really important is if you go back to the year 2020, the big year that changed all of our lives, three powerful planets, Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn, aligned for the first time in the history of civilization in a challenging way during the year of 2020 in Capricorn. So anytime that other planets are cruising through Capricorn during the year, it tends to remind us and bring back and revive old issues from 2020, like the pandemic and the election and all of these things. Yeah. So this Mercury retrograde going through that same area of the sky, Capricorn, is going to do exactly what certain things did during 2020. It's definitely going to shake the stock market and cause more dollar devaluation. And we might be dealing with some old 2020 karma. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a tight New Year's, okay? Beyond that, yeah, like what happens beyond just this year? So the way to look at it, the sequence of events in our current life is basically this. 2020 marked the end of civilization as we know it, right? We put the planet on lockdown, and I think inside of us, it kind of sparked this crisis of consciousness, yeah? The following year, 2021, it was this slow reopening of civilization, like, are we still going to do life, guys, or are we just not doing life? Yeah, we were kind of opening the door but closing the door. And there was a lot of really gritty transition between the idea of the old school versus the new school, right? Because our lives and civilizations were forever transformed. So we were trying to kind of decide in 2021, what's the new normal? Now, in 2022 and into next year of 23, this is bringing the further opening of the door, right? Like life does move on, the world does continue to turn, so we have to yank the door back open on civilization. But it's bringing a lot of discomfort around specifically the things that divide us, our opposing factions and points of views, right? Whether that's political, you voted for this person, I voted for that person, whether it's vaccine status, I got the vaccine, I didn't get the vaccine, whether it's, pro-America or pro-globalism and a whole host of other things, right? But it's, as we're yanking that door open, it's really showing some of our discomforting divides. Now, the other thing that may be happening as we eke into next year is there could be some really serious ecological challenges, meaning Mother Nature just happens. And it's going to require a collective response from all of us, regardless of our differences. Because when Mother Nature strikes, she doesn't care whether you're black, white, Republican, Democrat, pro this, anti that, right? Mother Nature just does her thing. And as humans and a global citizen, we may have to just help each other out. So it'll be interesting to see how Mother Nature forces us to possibly come together, even when our egos don't want us to. 2024 could be the really next important year that goes down in history. Of course, it will be the year of the next US presidential election. But I will say this, there could be a plot twist just before that in 2023. Remember, we talked about that Pluto transition next year. And an unexpected plot twist that could affect the 2024 presidential election would be like, what if in 2023 something happened to the president, like an assassination or an untimely death or an emergency of some kind, right? So it'll be interesting to see, particularly as we make that new election in 2024 and what the planets are aligning to then is, I think it's really going to be the final letting go of the old school, of the establishment. also of American power at that time. And it could also bring troubled waters with American civil stability, meaning amongst you and I. It'll be also fascinating. I would watch the Royal British Monarchy, if and how they're going to continue to survive in the role of actually being a monarchy versus being just like political leaders. There may be some things that fall apart in terms of the actual structure of what the people want of those leaders, yeah? And then also dissolution in the EU, yeah? Things might be kind of falling apart for those countries in Europe, yes? Now, further out, 2025 to 26, those are really interesting, particularly because of Uranus. And what that does is in the sky, it takes us back to the time in our life when the revolutionary planet actually sparked both the American Revolution and later the Civil War. So when Uranus moves into the position of Gemini in the history of America, it always seems to spark war and a press for independence. So will that happen to us again? So far, 2 out of 3, right? We're coming up on the third one. So 2 times it's been true. So let's see if it's true on the third occasion. Yeah. So that'll be a little bit further out. And, you know, regarding the idea of war in general, aside from civil war, is that could signal some kind of war between the East and the West that feels imminently on the horizon. And that could be with Russia, China, or some other player that we have yet to assess. Yeah. So what do you think about the destiny of America? This is where I would love to hear your questions, your comments, your curiosities, if we have any, so we can all learn from each other. And if there's not any questions, comments, or curiosities, and you're just too stunned by all of this astrological information, that's okay, because I know we're at our class limit, and some of us may be needing to go home right now, so that's okay too. But let me check the chat box. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. If there are any questions, I will make time to answer them. Okay, very informative. Thank you so much. Awesome. Everything made sense. Cool, glad to hear it. Perfect. Thank you so much for all the compliments. And if we don't have any class questions, then I hope you took some fantastic notes. And I hope this got you thinking about what role you would like to play in America's future. Because remember, the stars don't always dictate our destiny. They show patterns that are happening, and we have free will. So if we want to change the future, we have to change what we're doing in the present. Yeah. Well, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your year. And of course, I hope that we all have a lot of faith in our ability to be great citizens and lead the future of our nation into a bright new chapter. All the best. I'll see everyone very soon.